The city of Sardis intersects with a biblical story at only 2 points. The first is a passing reference to Obadiah 20, which names Sepharad among the cities into which Israelites had already been dispersed in exile. This has been identified with Sparda, the Persian name for the district and its leading city, a name that also appears in Aramaic in a bilingual inscription, Aramaic and Lydian, in Sardis itself. The second appearance is the more significant, as John names the Christian community or communities in Sardis among the recipients of his revelation, addressing them specifically and none too flatteringly in one of the 7 oracles. Sardis sits 60 miles east of Smyrna and 35 miles southeast of Thyatira, within the horseshoe-shaped circuit of these 7 congregations that John the prophet may have traveled before his removal to the island of Patmos. Sardis has a legendary past as the seat of the kingdom of Lydia. It was situated beside the Pactolus River, whose sands, rich in gold dust, gave the city a constant source of wealth. Coins made of electrum, a gold and silver alloy, were minted here as early as the 7th century BC. One of its kings, Croesus, became proverbially associated with wealth and with folly for provoking the Persians and losing his kingdom thereby. The Persians extended their royal road into their newly conquered territory, linking Sardis, capital of the empire's westernmost satrapy, with the capital city of Susa, some 1,500 miles away to the east. A short stretch of this well-paved road has been uncovered along the south of the Sardis synagogue complex. This located Sardis on a major trade and communications route that persisted into the Roman period, positioning the city for ongoing prosperity. Sardis was a major urban center with upwards of 60,000 residents during the Roman period. Unfortunately, very little of first-century Sardis, such as might illumine the context and situation of the Christian church addressed by John, has been uncovered. The most impressive archaeological remains post-date the New Testament period by a century or more. The Acropolis, with the most ancient remains predating the Persian invasion, has yielded little archaeological fruit, having been subject to centuries of erosion and collapse. The oldest structure of significance is the temple to Artemis, built about 2/3 of a mile west of the Acropolis. The worship of Artemis was popular throughout the cities of Roman Asia, nowhere more so than in Ephesus. The temple of Artemis in Sardis, however, was a marvel, the 8th largest temple in the Greek world, with 8 grand Ionic columns supporting its roof on the east and west sides, and 20 columns on each of the longer sides. The temple's footprint is about 300 by 160 feet, covering twice the amount of ground as the Parthenon in Athens, its roof once rising to a height of over 80 feet. A large stone altar sits in front of the temple to the west, as was typical throughout the ancient world. The temple was the house of the deity. Worshippers gathered respectfully outside for the rites and sacrifices. Construction on this temple, which replaced an earlier Artemis temple on the site, began in 334 BC, shortly after Alexander wrested control of Asia Minor from the Persians, but it suffered major interruptions. It remained operational but unfinished until the 2nd century AD, when the temple was rebuilt and rededicated to include the cult of the then living emperor Antoninus Pius and his deceased wife Faustina. The cult images of the imperial couple were massive. The heads alone measured a yard from chin to crown. The temple structure was situated close by the Pactolus stream, which ran a fairly straight course to the north and west of the city. a structure tentatively identified as a shrine to Cybele, sat about 500 yards northeast of the Artemis Temple, also in close proximity to the Pactolus River. Worship of Cybele, identified as the Great Mother Goddess, is well attested in Lydia and Asia in general, famous for her eunuch priests. About 500 yards northeast of the Acropolis sat two structures essential to entertainment during the Roman period: the theater and the stadium. Only the general contours of the theater, plus the massive retaining walls that once supported its seating at the open ends, remain to be seen today, the vast majority of the seating itself having been removed and repurposed. The theater opened out over one end of the stadium complex, which remains itself largely unexcavated, save for a few lengths of the broad arched passageway that once led under and gave access to the seating. The most prominent building left standing in ancient Sardis is the reconstructed gymnasium, standing a little over 1,000 yards north of the Acropolis and northeast of the Artemis Temple. The present structure was built in the mid to late 2nd century AD, but there was no doubt a gymnasium in the city for centuries prior to that. For the gymnasium, which combined emphases on education and athletics, was the primary institution for forming the next generation into good Greeks in every Greek or Hellenized city. This gymnasium had an expansive square forecourt called a palaestra, consisting of a field of over 200 feet long on each of its four sides, the whole once surrounded by porticos, sporting 100 columns facing the interior. This was the location of the facility's athletic fields, where wrestling, boxing, running, discus throwing, and other events were practiced. Little of the original architecture of the forecourt remains. The massive entrance hall, separating the palaestra from the bathhouse, however, has been painstakingly reconstructed. The breathtaking ornamentation of the hall, together with its pious dedicatory inscription to the members of the imperial household, has led archaeologists to suspect that it functioned not only as a grand vestibule, but also as a site for the celebration of imperial cult rituals. The dedicatory inscription appears to come from the Severan period, or the early 3rd century, as it makes mention of Septimius Severus, Caracalla, and Caracalla's mother, Julia Domna. The inscription also bears proud witness to the fact that, by this time, Sardis had been awarded the title Neokoros, the designation of temple warden of the cult of a deified emperor, not once, but twice. The cities in Roman Asia regarded this title as a principal claim to fame. Inscriptions in Ephesus and Pergamum show that the inhabitants of those cities regarded their enjoyment of the title Neokoros as the second most important feature of the city, after the city's name itself. Immediately inside the structure, behind the marble hall, was a shallow swimming pool, or natatorium. This may have also functioned as the frigidarium, or cold plunge, of the bath complex. The rooms behind, which still lie in ruins, would have offered the remainder of the typical features of a Roman bath: a tepidarium, a caldarium, essentially a sauna, and dressing rooms and spaces for massages and scraping oneself with olive oil for cleansing. Lecture halls and classroom spaces were likely also part of the complex, perhaps in the wings to either side of the marble hall. The third most prominent site in Sardis is a Jewish synagogue, dating in its present form from the 4th century AD. The Jewish community in Sardis significantly predates this structure. Aside from the passing reference in Obadiah, verse 20, Antiochus III is known to have relocated 2,000 Jewish families from Syria and Babylon to the western frontier regions of his empire, including the region of Lydia and, no doubt, its capital city, Sardis. Josephus also records decrees by Roman officials confirming the traditional rights of the Jewish community in Sardis, including the right of assembly, adjudicating internal affairs, and collecting funds for the Jerusalem temple. The present synagogue building no doubt had many predecessors, though quite probably not in this prominent a location. The synagogue consists here of two principal rooms, an interior hall of about 200 feet by 60 feet, and a forecourt of about 80 by 60 feet. The forecourt is furnished with a central fountain. The main hall is estimated to have been able to accommodate around 1,000 worshippers. While the synagogue is rich in inscriptions, over 80 were recovered, and therefore in insights into the place of the Jewish community in late Roman Sardis, the existing evidence is centuries later than Revelation. An astounding feature of the synagogue is its placement adjacent to the gymnasium complex itself, as well as its ornate decoration and construction. This suggests that by the late 3rd or early 4th century AD, the Jews of Sardis were very much at home, quite prosperous, and accepted by their Gentile neighbors to a very high degree. This is somewhat unusual in the ancient world, given typical anti-Jewish prejudice among Gentiles and the not infrequent eruptions of violence against local Jewish communities. The Jewish community here was well integrated into the life of the city. The most distinctive feature of a synagogue was the nomophulakion, now referred to as an ark, in which the Torah scrolls were housed. These two niches, located in the rear, the east end of the main hall, originally served this purpose. The synagogue had a central table for the reading of the Torah scrolls and accompanying scriptures, the Haftorah. The two bases of the table sport a pair of Roman eagles. This is quite strange, first of all, given the fact that Jews tended to avoid depictions of animals or people in fulfillment of the second commandment. It is also surprising, given the fact that the Romans had by this time twice devastated the Jews' homeland, in 70 and 135 AD, and the eagle was the most prominent symbol of Rome. Statues of lions decorated the central space of the main hall as well, likely repurposed from the by then defunct shrine of Cybele, a goddess often portrayed flanked by a pair of lions. Even if they were reimagined as representations of the Lion of Judah, identified with the tribe of Jews in Sardis who designated themselves the Leontioi, the lion tribe. The carved depiction of animals in a synagogue nevertheless shows a remarkable accommodation of the second commandment to Greco-Roman religious artistic practices. The mosaic designs on the floor, however, were all of the more typical geometric designs with no images. The elders of the synagogue enjoyed a place of honor in semicircular seats at the front end of the main hall. This area might also have served as a kind of community council chamber, being crafted in imitation of the typical civic council chamber or bouleuterion. The forecourt of the synagogue also sported an ornate mosaic floor, again rich in geometric patterns, but not in images. Several inscriptions have been laid within the mosaic. One, for example, reads, Aurelius Polyhippos, a God-fearer, having prayed, fulfilled his vow. Gentile adherents of the synagogue, like Polyhippos, may have paid for some portion of its decoration as thank offerings for answered prayers. A row of Byzantine period shops, some of which enjoyed running water, has been excavated along the south wall of the synagogue, along the street that runs alongside the south wall of the synagogue and gymnasium complex. The Christians whom the glorified Christ chastened in the 5th of the 7th oracles that opened Revelation appear to have taken heed to Christ's warning. The church continued its living witness into the 2nd century and beyond, until the Sassanid invasion destroyed Sardis and scattered all its inhabitants in 616 AD. The most dramatic archaeological witness to this is the fine Byzantine chapel in the southeast corner of the precincts of the Temple of Artemis. Worship of Christ significantly outlasted the worship of Artemis in this city. A smaller church structure has been uncovered in the near vicinity of the shrine to Cybele, another sign of the growth and indeed the victory of the Christ cult over the others that had enjoyed such widespread devotion in the city and surrounding region for so long.